Soon our heroes reached their goal and landed on the ground. Despite our hero's skepticism, it really turned out to be an oasis. There was a rather large and crystal-clear lake in the middle, with a lot of greenery around it. Now for our heroes, this was just what they needed. Now that they were here, they could relax and regain their strength. Gecko was particularly happy about this, as he could finally set foot on solid ground. Wu soon turned to his daughter and told her to dig it into the ground and then go get some water. Armed with shovels, Gecko and Yin Yun set to work. But as it turned out, someone had been watching them all this time. But strangely enough, the one watching them had no evil intentions at all. The previously known Black Dragon fell in love with Yin Yun at first sight. He not only liked her beauty, but also the fact that she was an Eastern dragon. This meant that if he were to marry the bride of a famous house, it would definitely be honorable and raise his status. However, as he watched her, he couldn't help but wonder why she was carrying a strange flower. Furthermore, even though she was probably very thirsty after the flight, she preferred to dig that strange object into the ground first. For a black dragon, it was all too strange and incomprehensible. Soon, Yin Yun and Gecko finished their task and could finally drink water. After drinking to their heart's content, they happily exclaimed how wonderful it was to drink refreshing water after a long and exhausting journey. While they were enjoying the water, Wu Sun remained on guard. Ever since they arrived here, he had never left the feeling that someone was watching them. His thoughts were interrupted by Yin Yun, who brought water and asked if she could give him a drink. Now our hero was all for it, as the temperature of the water and soil was normal. This was the best refreshing shower he had had in a while. In addition to the shower, Wu Sun also got some much-needed water for his roots, and for the first time in a long time, he was able to replenish his already nearly exhausted supply. However, as always, the water he didn't have time to absorb poured out through the hole in the cannon. Gecko immediately jumped aside and told our hero to warn him when he was going to go to the restroom. Wu Sun irritatedly told him to shut up and stop talking nonsense. At the same time, the black dragon who was watching them was very angry and could barely contain himself. He couldn't understand why the dragoness was serving the strange flower and looking at him with such a submissive look. They were noble dragons and could not afford to be ruled by anyone, much less an ugly flower. Suddenly Gecko pointed somewhere and said that he smelled that there was food there. Our hero was puzzled by this information. Yin Yun, on hearing this, enthusiastically said that she would go and check it out. Gecko's sense of smell did not lie, and a moment later the dragoness really found a camel's corpse in the bushes. Bringing it to our hero, she said happily that now she didn't need to hunt. Besides, there was plenty of meat, which would allow them to eat well. The black dragon, who had his prey taken away from him in front of his eyes, was burning with rage. What he had taken with his own strength had just been taken by someone else. All he could do now was not to ruin his first impression in front of the dragoness. Wu Sun, on the other hand, became wary at the sight of the camel's corpse. The bloodstain still hadn't dried, which meant that it had been killed recently. In addition, from the wound marks on its body, it could definitely be said that it had been killed by a large beast. But the strangest thing was that there were no wounds on the camel's neck, while all its bones were broken. This immediately led our hero to think that someone had killed it in the same way that his daughter usually used, namely by dropping the prey from a great height. While he was thinking about it, Yin Yun and Gecko appeared to have already started eating. The dragoness casually asked our flower why he hadn't started eating yet. Wu Sun realized that it was too late to stop them, as they had already started eating. He replied that eating food of unknown source was very dangerous. After all, there was no way of knowing who it could belong to, or what could have been put in it. It could have been a trap. Hearing this, she asked if her stomach would hurt after eating it. Our hero didn't have an answer to that question. Besides, it was already too late to worry about it. Wu Sun doubted that someone would intentionally poison the food. Besides, all the facts indicated that the camel had been killed by some animal. So he decided not to stop his daughter and let her eat, while he decided to stand guard in case the owner of the camel's corpse showed up. While Yin Yun and the gecko continued to eat and wonder why Wu Sun was so tense and worried, our hero was looking worriedly into the distance. He had many reasons to be worried. The fact that the blood was still fresh meant that the beast had left recently. But why had it left? Was it afraid of them? It could be so, but it was possible that the enemy had been waiting and preparing for a sneak attack. While our hero was preparing for the worst, the black dragon continued to grow angrier and angrier. The intruders who took away his food continued to enjoy it without a second thought, and even questioned its quality. He was a majestic dragon that was supposed to do great things. So even though the dragoness was attractive, he decided to put those feelings aside. All he wanted now was for them to leave his territory. After finishing eating, a satisfied Yin Yun offered to eat to her daddy as well. She was still bothered by his gloomy and overly serious appearance. To calm him down a bit, she said that there was no one else in this oasis but them. Otherwise, they would have noticed it as they flew by. Wu Sun was not convinced by his daughter's words, for he realized that the beast could just be hiding well. However, he was also sure that since they had taken away its food, it would show up sooner or later. Since they had already done so, all they had to do was wait. Since our hero also needed to restore his supplies, he finally decided to eat. As soon as Wu Sun ate, the chests immediately appeared, and along with them, Ruhua appeared as usual. The system spirit looked around in bewilderment and asked where they were and why it was so dark. Our hero didn't care about his questions. He told him to stop talking and get to work. This time he had to open all the chests. Although there were only 3 chests, but from one of them, Wu Sun managed to obtain a new B-level gene. The new gene had the name of some unknown plant. From the information available, it could be infused with the entire body. If we look at the specs, this plant was the most drought-resistant. It could produce new shoots even after several years without water. For the first time in a long time, our hero was really excited about the new gene. After all, now when he would fuse it, he would no longer have to worry about the lack of water. And this was a very pressing problem while they were traveling through the desert. Even if he was bitten by a zombie, it wouldn't be a big problem now. Without a second thought, he ordered the system spirit to proceed with the fusion. As usual, he didn't feel any meaningful change in himself. However, it seemed that the need for water had become not as strong as before. While Wu Sun was trying to understand how his gene worked, Yin Yun asked him what they were going to do with the remaining meat, as there was still quite a lot of it. He immediately discarded the idea of taking it with him, as it would spoil very quickly. Eating flies was not a good idea. Since it was cool at night, it wouldn't spoil. They would have enough leftover food to feed them all day tomorrow, just until they set off again. Hearing this, everyone happily agreed to this plan. Well, or almost all of them. The only exception was the Black Dragon. When he heard that they were going to stay here for another night and day, he was finally angry. His patience was broken. He finally showed himself out of the bushes, and with a fierce growl began to shout that he had already been kind enough, and let them eat his food and drink his water. However, the fact that they were going to stay here was already too brazen of them. All he wanted them to do was to get out of his land as quickly as possible. Our heroes were not particularly frightened by the appearance of the Black Dragon. To be more precise, they were just surprised. Wu Sun's assumption that someone had been watching them all this time was confirmed. Turning to him, our hero asked him if he was the one who had killed the camel. The Black Dragon was annoyed that his fierce shout didn't scare anyone. However, he didn't plan to continue his aggression, so he replied in a disgruntled voice that he was. Hearing this, Wu Sun immediately smiled in a friendly manner and began to apologize. He explained that they didn't see anyone near the corpse, so they thought it didn't belong to anyone. Even though he didn't want to confront the dragon, our hero couldn't help but ask why he was secretly spying on them from afar. Was he too afraid to meet them, or was he trying to stealthily attack them? The Black Dragon didn't answer immediately, but only silently shifted his gaze to the perplexed Yin Yun. As if deciding something, he replied in a surly voice that this territory belonged to him, Benlong. That was why he could do whatever he wanted here. He wasn't going to hold them responsible for eating his food. However, now that they were fed, they should have leave his territory immediately. But just like last time, no one took his serious words seriously. As if not hearing what he was saying, Yin Yun ran up to him and excitedly asked if he was a dragon too. A little embarrassed by this, Benlong himself forgot what he was talking about. He replied that he was. Confirming her guess, the dragoness asked, puzzled as to why he looked different from her. It was a strange question for a black dragon to ask. However, he patiently explained that it was because there were many kinds of dragons, and he belonged to the noblest of them all, the black dragon species. However, all his words about nobility were shattered by one innocent question from Yin Yun. She noted that he was fat and had small wings, so she couldn't help but ask if he could fly. Although it was a rather rude question, Benlong was able to restrain himself and simply replied that he was an expert in flying. However, there was no end to the dragoness's questions. This was the first time she had met a member of her species, so it was no surprise that there was a lot she wanted to ask. Looking at the black dragon once more, she asked if all black dragons were as ugly as he was. Although Benlong tried to hold back, this question was the last straw. He began to shout irritably that he wasn't ugly at all. He began to claim that he was a beautiful and one-of-a-kind dragon that attracted thousands of admirers in his hometown. Now that he was angry and had nothing to lose, he asked the frightened Yin Yun why she, being a noble dragon, was serving a strange flower. The dragoness didn't really understand what he was talking about. Looking at her daddy, who the black dragon was pointing at, she replied that it was her father. Now it was Benlong's turn to wonder at the absurdity of her words. He couldn't believe that she believed she could be related to this flower if they weren't even the same species. He had never met a dragon so stupid before. The very next moment, however, it dawned on him that he might have jumped to conclusions. There was a strange flower in his hometown that could release hallucinogenic pollen. Creatures who inhaled it would hallucinate and behave abnormally. Because the dragoness asked strange and seemingly obvious questions and called the flower her father, he thought that she was being controlled by that strange flower. He immediately tried to explain to Yin Yun that she was trapped in an illusion, and because of that, she believed that the flower was her father. Luckily for her, she met him, the great Benlong. He was the one who could help her get rid of her hallucination. However, Yin Yun didn't understand anything the black dragon said. But that didn't matter to Benlong. Not only did he want to help her, but he also wanted to be the hero who saved the princess. The very next moment, he opened his toothy mouth and rushed towards our hero. Seeing that her daddy was in danger, Yin Yun quickly rushed after the black dragon. She shouted at him to stop and not to hurt her father. Wu Sun was also not too happy about this turn of events. After all, he didn't want to face the dragon in battle at all. Since he didn't hear their conversation, he couldn't understand why the dragon suddenly decided to attack him. Luckily, he had his daughter, who immediately caught up with the dragon and tried to stop him. Turning to her, Benlong asked irritably why she was in his way. After all, what he was doing was purely for her sake. Looking at the strange flower, he thought that if he just destroyed it, it should be enough to make the dragoness come to her senses. In the next instant, he gave our hero a crushing blow with his tail. That sent him and the cannon flying into the air. From such a blow, and also not the softest landing, Wu Sun was very dizzy. It took him a while to regain consciousness. When she saw that her daddy had been hit by the black dragon, she immediately slapped the black dragon's face with her paw. She angrily started screaming and asking him why he did it. While Yin Yun was dealing with Benlong, Wu Sun began to slowly come to his senses. Right now, he was truly angry. After all, the black dragon had just almost killed him, and since he had started it first, he should take responsibility for the consequences. Our hero shouted furiously that he was about to taste the power of his dragon cannon. When he heard the word cannon, Benlong immediately fell silent, and fear showed on his face. It looked like he'd had experience with human cannons before. There was no way he wanted to meet them again. Even though he had seen the flower sitting in the cannon before, he thought it was clogged with dirt and didn't work. However, he had no desire to check if the cannon was really working or not. The risk was too great. Therefore, after a moment, he tucked his tail and started to run away. Yin Yun saw him off with a disdainful look. Wu Sun, on the contrary, was annoyed. He didn't want to let go of such an arrogant and ill-mannered dragon so easily. He definitely needed to be taught a good lesson. As it turned out, there was a misunderstanding. Our hero had no intention of using the cannon, and there was no way he could do that. By cannon, he meant thorns, which in the next moment flew into the fleeing dragon. It was a special technique called the Xanthium bomb. Benlong had no chance of escaping from them. As soon as the thorns caught up with him, he let out a painful scream. The thorns did indeed possess a truly terrifying power. However, the black dragon was more frightened of being hit by a cannonball. In fact, the pain wasn't that bad anymore. Taking a closer look at what hit him, he found that it was just a thorn. Realizing he'd been tricked, he lunged at our hero with even more fury. He wasn't going to tolerate being treated like this. But this time, Wu Sun was already fully prepared for the fight and was not going to retreat. Even though he couldn't do much damage to the dragon with his thorns, he was sure that it would be different with the arrow.